Thank you, Mr Clark. There's 9 amendments and we're in the hands of the Minister for Education.
Sir, I think the easiest thing is potentially to assist the House if we go through them one by one. And I might offer some commentary, and I suspect the Shadow Minister will have some commentary on them as we go. Some of them are clustered, but then the clusters aren't necessarily in order, so I'm sure we'll make our way through it with good faith, goodwill, and I might just open with a couple of words about the bill, which I think it's been a long journey. The first time that there was some of the seedlings of concepts that have made their way into this bill was as a result of a review that I think was commissioned by Minister Buckby 2 decades ago. Some of those ideas have made their ways into subsequent amendments in legislation. Some of those amendments have been passed, some not. And then a substantial bill was put forward by Jane Lomax-Smith in 2009 or possibly 2008. Jane Lomax-Smith continues her work in education as chair of the Teachers Registration Board, and I thank her for the role that she's playing there, as I know the government and the opposition are both grateful for the work that that body does. That bill didn't make it to fruition as a result of an election, and I think it was given some further attention through the subsequent 6 years until the current Shadow Minister was the Minister for Education, and the member for Port Adelaide put out for public consultation a bill which was the next generation of that bill, some enhancements on what had been offered before, and that was, from memory, at the beginning of 2017 or possibly late 2016, give or take. That bill was given significant public consultation. There were many improvements and enhancements which have been iterated in the second reading debates in 2017 and again last year. Ultimately, that one too fell just shy of passage in the Legislative Council. I think it was described as having run out of runway when there were about 20 bills for the Legislative Council to deal with in its last week of 2017, and education might have been 7 or 8th, and we only got through 5 or 6 or whatever it was. There were some matters that hadn't been resolved at that time, and they haven't been resolved since, but I hope that we are not far from being able to do so. The bill that was sent to the Legislative Council was supported in most parts by the Labor Party as well as obviously the government. There were a few changes from the 2017 bill which I focused on in the second reading speech in 2018. I think those enhancements were substantial. Many of them mirrored the amendments that we had moved to the bill in 2017, and I think that they benefit the bill and will ensure that it is in its best form once it completes its journey to existence, hopefully, and as I say, in the not-too-distant future. The Legislative Council, through the Labor Party, the Greens, SA Best and Mr Daly, all had suggested enhancements to the bill, which variously became amendments that were passed in 4 particular categories in the Legislative Council. One of those was in relation to corporal punishment, and amendments moved by Ms Benares, I believe, would enhance the status of the corporal punishment offence in this bill to include non-government schools as well as government schools. Those offences, it is in fact already an offence to have corporal punishment in a school, but this would be an enhanced offence. The drafting of the bill, as I recall, reflected the drafting of the original Act, the original bill, which talked about it in government schools, but there's absolutely no reason why we wouldn't want to extend that protection to students in non-government schools as well. The non-government school sector, through Catholic Education SA and the Association of Independent Schools South Australia, have both confirmed that they support the measure. There are none of their schools in South Australia that would be in any way objecting to that measure, and frankly, as a point of principle, it is a good one. So the government will certainly be supporting those amendments from Ms Benares, which was supported by all of the other parties being on the record. I think Mr Lucas indicated we will be likely to support them as well. The three remaining categories are in relation to religion, and we can talk about that one in a little bit more detail. I think that the amendment that has come from the Legislative Council effectively would take the decision-making out of the hands so much of the principal, with the secondary decision-maker then being the parent, and put it into the Governing Council as that decision-maker. The government is not inclined to support that nuance in the bill. I think governing councils are tremendously important. They're an avenue for parental involvement and engagement in their schools and for community to support the schools. And I think that putting the governing council as the decision maker when it comes to religious activity in schools, whether that be through a school participating in an Easter service or visiting a synagogue or a mosque, or whatever that other religious activity is, I think having that as a decision of the Governing Council risks people attending a Governing Council meeting only based on that issue and potentially not being thinking about their involvement in the broader context of what Governing Councils have to offer. We maintain the position. We believe that the decision makers should be the principal and then the parents deciding in relation to their own child, and then the question of comes back to the one where there was a dispute in 2017 and again in the Legislative Council on whether it should be, I believe in the Legislative Council, on whether it should be an opt-in or opt-out. In effect, of course, the form that parents are asked to sign, whether they want their child to participate or not, would be the same form, whether it is indeed an opt-in or an opt-out. The question is what happens with those children whose parents don't return the form or don't click the box on the app. The reality is that I'm sure that we can resolve this distinction. The government will be opposing the amendments in relation to the Governing Council becoming the decision maker, and I'm confident that in the LegCo or if needed in a subsequent Conference of Managers, I'm sure we'll be able to resolve the other one. The tying of this amendment to questions about Christmas carols I don't think is relevant in this question, because the bill already makes it explicitly clear in another section which has not been threatened in any way through the passage of this debate that Christmas carols are an acceptable activity in schools, and so I can give comfort to anyone who is concerned about that. And I'm sure that, as the Shadow Minister for Education has pointed out, she is a supporter of Christmas carols and sings Christmas carols, and I have every confidence that the bill as continues will protect Christmas carols. I do think it would be better for it to remain, as the government's position has been stated, as an opt-out option. If children's parents wish them to opt out of being involved in one of those religious activities, that would be their right. And it would be important for schools to have an alternative activity of purpose for the child to be involved in and for the child to suffer no detriment as a result of that opt-out. And I think that that is the most sensible way forward. I think that the next... and so the government will be opposing that amendment. The next matters relate to the role of the Australian Education Union and staff representation on a couple of committees. One of them is the Review Committee, which is a committee that is established when there is a proposal to close a school or schools. The most recent example of this is in Whyalla, where in order to build the new school in Whyalla, late last year I as Minister commissioned a review of the two existing high schools. The three existing high schools in Whyalla, the 2 8 to 10 schools and the 11 and 12 schools. And that review comprises a range of people like the Mayor, people like the principals of the schools, and at the moment, in the current legislation, it includes an Australian Education Union representative, and we were proposing to change that to a General Staff representative, who could be an AEU rep or it could be somebody else. There's a secondary committee which is in relation to promotional positions, but it's the same principle. We were proposing to change the existing AEU rep to a General Staff rep. The amendments that have come back to us from the Legislative Council, I think in their design might have been suggested to be a best of both worlds, includes an AEU rep and a General Staff rep. But we're talking about fairly small committees in relation to the promotional panel, and I think that having an extra representative is unnecessary. I think that it would be preferable to just remain with the original staff rep. And encourage legislative councillors, if the House rejects these amendments today, I encourage legislative councillors to return to that original bill's premise and just have a general staff rep without giving the AU a particularly privileged position in the legislation. That said, obviously we'll have a look at what the Legislative Council chooses to do, and if the Legislative Council wishes to continue having the AEU on, then we'll give consideration to that in the Conference of Managers. But I think that it would be more sensible to have one position rather than two, and the government will be opposing the amendment, certainly as presented. Now, I note in relation to the last matter, which is to do with an education ombudsman, that there has been some movement here. Now, the Education Ombudsman is a proposal that has been around for some time. Particularly has been one that gains traction when there are heightened levels of concern about complaints handling processes in schools and the Department of Education. The complaints handling processes in schools are an important body of work. It's not always an easy body of work. It is tremendously important that when something goes wrong in a school and policies aren't followed in the way that they're supposed to be, then the rights of children and their parents be utterly respected. It is also important, of course, that the management of schools be done in a way that is also in the best interests of the school, and I think our principals and our teachers do an amazing job. But it's a large system. We have 30,000 employees in our education system, 500 schools and 400 other sites, mostly preschools, 900 sites across South Australia, and it's a large and diverse system. Our expectation at the moment is, of course, that if there is a complaint, it be dealt with at the local level first, and then if it needs to be escalated to the Education Director, then that can be the case. And there's an education complaints line within the Education Department, and if people aren't satisfied, they can, of course, go to the Ombudsman. And the Ombudsman at the moment deals with a reasonable number of education-related complaints. The Education Department effectively pays to the Ombudsman a significant amount of money, I believe in the hundreds of thousands of dollars, to fulfil that work. But there are reasonable questions, certainly, that can be asked and have been raised by Tammy Franks, by the opposition, by the Liberal Party when we were in opposition about this process. The DeBell inquiry indeed made some recommendations in relation to this that the Ombudsman then explored. The Ombudsman made some recommendations, I think in 2016, and the member for Port Adelaide as Minister asked her department to implement those recommendations, and certainly by the time I was briefed as an incoming minister at the beginning of last year, those recommendations had been taken up and I think were completed during the course of last year. They were important recommendations, and I'm very confident that the systems and structures in place in the Education Department are adequate. They are hard-working people who do a good job. But we always want things to be better. And there are reasonable questions that continue to be asked, as is to be expected in a system so broad. So I'm very pleased to be able to share with the House that through the positive and constructive good faith discussions we've had with the Greens, with the Labor Party, with Mr Darley and with the SA Best Group, but particularly I'll acknowledge Tammy Franks as having led this, as it's obviously her amendments that are in the bill. The Honourable Tammy Franks, that the government has come to an agreement of supporting Tammy Franks' very sensible suggestion, which I appreciate the role played by the member for Port Adelaide, the Shadow Minister, in indicating that the Labor Party was supportive as well, although I'll let her speak for herself in a moment, obviously, that to ensure that this Ombudsman matter is given due consideration, but that consideration not unduly delay the bill and the benefits of the broader bill being available for our schools and our teachers and our students and our families. The government is indicating that we are happy to have a significant inquiry into a number of the matters that have been raised by the Honourable Tammy Franks and others. This inquiry will be a substantial inquiry that will be seeking to report during 2020, and there will be no doubt recommendations that the government will give consideration to, and the public and the people of South Australia, the Parliament, may give consideration to. It will look at issues including relating to suspensions, exclusions and expulsions. It will look at some matters that were related in the Select Committee into Access for Education for Children with a Disability, and it will also give consideration to that complaints handling process, including whether the current arrangements with the Ombudsman are satisfactory, or whether the scope of what the Ombudsman could look at should be expanded, or whether the powers should be expanded, whether there should be policy recommendations coming from the role, whether indeed there should be a specific education Ombudsman. We are not presupposing what the inquiry will suggest. We will take it as a very substantive inquiry that we will give due consideration to in due time, but it will have the opportunity and the time to really investigate what is best practice, what is going to work best for families, for students, and for our education system as a whole. And it's easy to think of that education system as one large behemoth of an organisation, but it is an important one. It is an important one where if we can get that organisation firing on all cylinders, then it will be giving the best support to our children across South Australia. Everyone in this chamber, I'm certain, has an ambition that every child, whatever their circumstance, whatever their abilities, whatever their interests, and whatever their physical location, will be able to achieve whatever they can in life, to live a successful life, which is, in my view, one where you are looking forward to what the day has to hold when you wake up in the morning, to be able to find the job they want and be given the skills and the capacities to do that job. And if this inquiry will help us get there, then we value it. We are looking to have that inquiry hosted by I'll be seeking that it be hosted by the Child Development Council, which has a suitable infrastructure to do so. It will give the inquirer, the reviewer, will work on who that will be in the coming weeks. It will give them a sounding board, if you like, through the Child Development Council, which is a group of experts in child development from a range of different practices and professional backgrounds. It will give them a sounding board as they conduct their inquiry, and also give them some infrastructure and some independence. They're at arm's length. They're a statutory authority, effectively. They're at arm's length from the government and will assist that inquiry in its deliberations. With that in mind, the particulars of the Education Ombudsman amendments that have been put to us by the Legislative Council, my understanding is that they won't be insisted on when it gets back, because obviously we'll be looking to conduct the inquiry first before consideration of those other matters are. And so we will obviously be opposing those amendments. So I think that I've probably gone through, in broad conceptual terms, the detail of the different amendments. And if it assists the House, I'll indicate that the first amendment is in relation to the Education Ombudsman, so it's one that the government will be disagreeing to. But I suspect the member opposite might have some broader comments to make as well.
Thank you. I'd like to, before I go to the Deputy Leader, I'd like to welcome to the House nurse advocates attending as part of the South Australian Nursing and Midwifery Education Advanced Training Course. Guests of the member for Hurtle Vale, and welcome to the Parliament.
I'd just like to confirm with the Minister that he's moving that Amendment 1 be disagreed to.
To be clear, I move that Amendment number 1 be disagreed to.
Thank you, Minister.
Yeah, that's good.
Deputy Leader.
Thank you, Mr Chair. I will speak very briefly in generalities about these amendments, and then we can go through each of them. What I'd like to say initially, though, is how pleased I am that we're getting very close now to getting an Act, Education and Children's Services Act. It has been very long in the making, and I think will make a significant difference to the quality of education and children's services that are offered across the state. And so I'm very pleased to have played a constructive role, both previously as Minister in introducing it before the last election, and then in being largely supportive of it in the terms under which it's been brought by the present Minister. I indicate that our initial position on this side of the chamber had been to maintain our position on the amendments that the government's indicated that it won't be supporting. However, there has been very good progress on the question of an education ombudsman, and I am pleased to say that we support the idea of a review, or the fact that a review will occur, that has been agreed with the Honourable Tammy Franks in the other place, and therefore will support the government in opposing that amendment, which is the initial amendment that we're talking about. I had items on my list to do that I didn't get to finish, as I'm sure is true of every minister when they suddenly become no longer minister as a result of an election or any other change. And one of those was this quite vexed question of exclusions and suspensions for students in our school system, recognising that a disproportionate number of young people who experience suspension through to exclusion are also known to have a disability. When you add in are also known to come from families that are struggling with very real poverty, often multi-generational poverty and unemployment, you realise that although punishment might in an immediate sense appear to be necessary, it is not getting to the root of the challenges that these young people experience. And punishment, if I can use that term broadly, that is about removing a child from experiencing education, is probably the worst thing you can do for that child or that young person, even appreciating the difficulties that teachers, SSOs and principals are managing in classrooms and in schools. So I'm very pleased to think that the Child Development Council, with its expertise and any additional expertise that is made available to it through the government making this decision, will be deeply contemplating this systemic question. I'm very pleased to think that that will happen. And I very much hope that there will be a bipartisan view formed as a result about how this might be managed better within the school system in the future. And I'd like to pay tribute to the Honourable Tammy Franks, not only for continuously raising this as an issue, but also being prepared to be flexible on an amendment that I know matters a lot to her, to have an education ombudsman, but to be prepared to be flexible in order to advance this case, and at the same time to further interrogate whether the changes that have been made within the department in complaints handling, and whether the powers and interests and concentration of the ombudsman are sufficient so that we can have a better and more informed view about that in the future. So on that basis, for the First Amendment, we will vote with the government. We'll support the government's position, as I understand will occur in the Legislative Council. I'll just say briefly on the other two that we'll maintain our position here. Clearly that doesn't make a difference in numbers. Ultimately in the lower house. For the religion question, it'll be interesting to see what kind of discussions we have should we go to having to invoke the deadlock provisions, assuming that the Legislative Council insists. There are many ways to manage the question of religion in our schools. I don't believe that there is any practice occurring in public schools that is problematic. I've not had any raised with me. It's not something that you hear on the radio. It doesn't appear to be in practice a problem. But we do need to be sensitive about the way in which we talk about, in particularly in a multicultural society, the variety of religious beliefs that exist within the community and how they're expressed in what is fundamentally a secular institution, which is public education for all. And I think we're all well-intentioned about that, and there will likely be quite a sensible resolution. But we will be continuing to support the involvement of the Governing Council in helping to be decision makers. And then, of course, with the union, we maintain our position that the union is an important representative of the workers within the public education system who are not, and that is not the same as simply selecting a representative from an individual school, that with the union comes more weight in negotiations that might be necessary, particularly in the context of a school closure that isn't one that everyone thinks is a good idea, that is a genuine interrogation of whether or not a school ought to be closed. And to have a union with a separate voice rather than a teacher who might be concerned about their future on that committee remains important to the Labor Party, and we'll be voting that way.
Okay, so in relation to amendment number 1, there's a move that amendment number 1 be disagreed to. All those in favour say aye. All those against say no. The ayes have it. Minister.
Sir, amendment number 2 is also in relation to the Ombudsman question, and reflecting on the words I said before, I move that it be disagreed to.
Deputy Leader. Okay, so amendment number 2, there's been a movement to disagree with amendment number 2. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Minister.
So amendment number 3 is in relation to the matter of corporal punishment. The government supports this amendment, and so I move that it be agreed to.
Shadow Minister. Okay, move that amendment number 3 be agreed to. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. That's agreed to. Minister.
So amendment number 4 is in relation to the amalgamation and closure of schools. It's the review committee that the Shadow Minister was just reflecting on, and for the reasons that I explained before, the government will be disagreeing with this amendment, and I move that it therefore be disagreed to.
Okay, Deputy Leader, no comment on that. So number 4, it's been moved to disagree with amendment number 4. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. That's passed. Minister.
So amendment number 5 is the amendment moved by Mr Darley that requires the approval of the governing council of a school before the principal may consider that time be set aside for the conduct of religious or cultural activities. We see this as a matter that is best dealt with by the principal and the parent, and therefore, as I explained earlier, the government will be seeking to disagree with this amendment. I move that it be disagreed to.
Thank you, Minister. Amendment number 5 has been moved to disagree. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Minister.
So amendment number 6 is also in relation to corporal punishment, ensuring that the matter relates to non-government schools as well as government schools. The government supports this amendment, and I move therefore that it be agreed to.
So amendment number 6, it's been moved to agree. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Minister.
So amendment number 7 is the other amendment in relation to the position of the Australian Education Union being singled out within the bill as opposed to a staff representative, this time in relation to the promotional level positions panels. And for the reasons outlined earlier, I move that it be disagreed to.
Okay, so number 7, the amendment number 7 has been moved to disagree. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Minister.
So amendment number 8 is in relation to the Education Ombudsman as earlier described, and I move that it be disagreed to.
Amendment number 8 has been moved to disagree. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no. The ayes have it. Minister. That's the last one.
So amendment number 9 is a further consequential amendment in relation to the Education Ombudsman concept, and in the context that we've just described, I move that it be disagreed to.
Okay, amendment number 9 has been moved to be disagreed. All those in favour say 9. Say 9. Sorry, Hansard. Say aye. I'm a bit raw at this. Those against say no. The ayes have it.